All right. Okay. Good afternoon from over here. So today I want to just um, briefly cover this. I don't want to go too long, but it's this troubling idea that continues to kind of undergird reality. Um, the troubling idea that undergirds reality is this logic of exchange. And actually, recently, the new net session that will come up that Daniel Garner will eventually upload um, is we talk about the how the logic of exchange is kind of how logic functions, and this is something that High Root in the net session kind of brings up that logic itself kind of already um, is a kind of exchange. That logic is exchange. That for A you can get B, and so on. Even mathematics has a kind of logic of exchange. 2 plus 2, you get 4. Right? It's the idea of you do this, you get this. Right? So this is the essential logic of exchange. But what's problematic about the logic of exchange is how we treat relations as such to the reducible logic of exchange. And I briefly have gone over it in my last video, but the idea is essentially this: that we are reducing relations to the exchange itself, meaning that I'm working this job and I keep hoping that when I work at this job I eventually will become manager or some goal like that. um, but if I don't get that, then what happens is I feel like I've been duped. I feel like I've been gypped from my hard work. My hard work should come with some type of payoff, right? And it's this notion of payoff and debt that perpetuates the logic of exchange. But I want to respond to this problem because I think the logic of exchange is kind of everywhere. If I'm being honest, but you could say in a cultural critique of this would be like maybe the logic of exchange is only rooted in capitalism, colonialism, mass scale. Uh, there's a lot to be had and debate, but let's just go with the assumption that in our current era, the logic of exchange has become globalized, essentially, right? With globalization, the logic of exchange sort of reigns supreme. So let's just make that our starting point. Where we are right now, I think that is my current diagnosis of the age. Now, this, depending on the scale, and this is what Daniel Garner will argue, depending on the scale, for example, smaller scales, you don't need to reduce the relation to a logic of exchange. But like Daniel Garner argues, that if we're talking about like the government, you kind of want them to actually do a kind of reciprocal exchange, right? Now, what I propose may challenge that idea, but still maintain the very same conclusion that Daniel Gardner leaves with. And it has to do with this idea of subsistence and gift. And I'm kind of borrowing these terms from anthropology because I'm also, not only am I, fun fact, not only am I a religious studies major currently, but I'm also a sociology minor. So I'm taking an anthropology class right now. It's called culture and then like culture and the individual. So it's trying to always like understand individual and culture and group settings, dynamics, everything like that. But anyways, um, when it started talking about ecological, I can't even say the word ecological uh, anthropology, uh, hunter gatherer formations were basically subsistence economies. What is a subsistence economy? A subsistence economy is basically the idea that, for example, the hunter gatherer society or group or tribe, whatever you want to call it, would basically do just enough to maintain their status quo, meaning their existence, essentially. Um, they would do enough just to maintain the relation of existing. So this is a subsistence economy that you're only doing enough to just support yourself and your group. You can't do enough to support the other group because you can't, right? Um, so I like this idea of subsistence because subsistence is not predicated on the idea of exchange, but rather on the idea that the relation that exists is there to, that you have to, the relation that, let me rephrase this, the relation that exists is there for you to maintain it and support its existence. So this is how I will frame subsistence in sort of opposing the logic of exchange. Subsistence as being the very idea that the relation requires its subsistence, that you have to maintain its relation. And so I think what's happened through our epochs is that if we're looking historically, that the logic of exchange didn't exist until, at least anthropologically speaking, the logic of exchange didn't exist until we started reaching higher scales, or a mass scale society. Basically, we started dealing with a larger society, more people. Um, Whereas previously, in the beginning, everything kind of started off with this idea of subsistence, that you were doing just enough to maintain the relation of the group, meaning to feed the group and live, right? You can never do less because then you don't survive, and you couldn't do more because it didn't allow you to do more, essentially. So this idea of subsistence. Um, and so what ends up happening with the logic of exchange is that the logic of exchange reduces the relations that we have to essentially this idea of commodity, right? That if I do this, I can get this. And that's kind of the logic of commodity, right? That I can gain this asset if I do this. So I don't. Um, so this is, I think this is the reduction that kind of happened. Now, I think the error that we made was that what's kind of tricky about this whole thing is that exchanges are kind of inevitable, but they don't have to be reduced to the exchange itself. I think what happened was that we did exchange without subsistence. We started exchanging without emphasizing subsistence. So basically what I'm saying is that we started emphasizing exchange and forgetting subsistence. Whereas I would promote, and I think one solution to the one answer to this issue of rethinking this issue of logical exchange is the idea that subsistence should be first. That the reason why you exchange is for subsistence. You don't exchange for gain or value, which actually has to do with kind of like commodity relations. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to shift this idea, this logic of exchange, from commodity relations to subsistence relations. Um, because you can see even in the dating sphere, as a kind of like little case study, the dating sphere currently, at least in popular culture on the internet, you can just look at any popular dating podcast that discusses the differences between men and women. You will notice the cultural term now of high value, that you must value yourself or must find a high value partner, and so on, that returns the adequate exchange that you deserve, right? And so this treats, what ends up happening is that we treat each other as a as we reduce each other to commodities of relations, basically, right? That your value is only as good as the exchange, essentially, right? So commodity relations, I will repeat, is that your value is only as good as the exchange itself, right? And so, but because we reduce relationships to commodity as such, right? Meaning the commodity has value, but the value can also increase and and decrease, predicated on the idea of what you exchange, right? So right now, I feel like we're having an abundance of commodity relations where the person that you're with or value can either increase or decrease predicated on what they exchange you with, and predicated on what they offer you and don't offer you, right? So it's funny because it's the same thing with like how we look at like a water bottle, right? Like if it fits my needs, then it's super valuable. If it does like if it also exceeds my comforts, right? Like it has this handle, so I don't have to like always grip it like this. It's valuable, right? But if it doesn't have the handle, then it can decrease its value for me because it doesn't achieve that comfort for me. And so basically what I'm doing is we're treating these relations the same way you can have a relation with a commodity to people, right? We're doing the same thing with people, and I'm pretty sure like Marx has already said this and so on. So the idea of answering this problem, in my opinion, is re-emphasizing the logic of subsistence. The logic of subsistence kind of roots from the anthropological idea of subsistence economies, where hunters and gatherers basically did enough to maintain their existence. It was just enough to maintain the relations of the group and their existence. They could not produce less because then they don't survive, and they could not produce more because of the scarcity, right? So basically, putting subsistence first over exchange, because exchange is inevitable, is the idea that you put lack at the forefront. That the exchange that I'm doing with you is only to be just enough to maintain the relation between you and me. It's never supposed to be so-called a um, exchange of commodity where the exchange is sort of valued less or more, but the exchange is supposed to be where it's enough to support the relationship between you and me, which is, in my opinion, a different way of thinking about it. So it means that when I do something for you, I don't think about trying to gain something or lose something, but I can look at doing something for you as a way of maintaining the very relations that exist between you and me, right? Which involves, ironically, sacrifice. Sacrifice can be a way of looking at maintaining the relations between you and me. But the moment that you commoditize sacrifice, meaning that sacrifice should come with some type of payoff, then what you're doing is you're already putting the relationship in some type of commodity where the value of the relationship can increase or decrease. But rather, the reason why we should exchange is not for the idea of increasing value or maintaining value, but the idea that the subsistence of the relationship is the value. That I'm exchanging primarily to maintain this relationship, And so this brings up the concept of the gift, where we can look at exchange instead of commodity relations as a gift as a kind of exchange. But what's funny about gifts is that, for example, like if you celebrate your birthday, um, the person being celebrated doesn't typically have to give a gift back. Isn't that ironic, right? Like the birthday person doesn't have to give anything back because it's their birthday, right? And yet we give them gifts. And it's so funny that we don't feel gypped off in some type of way, but some of us can, because we fall into that trap of like, if they don't appreciate our gift, then you know, they are not thankful, right? That the gift didn't pay off. But the notion of gift, at least in the context of birthdays, the way that we understand it, is merely to celebrate the subsistence of the individual, right? That it's to celebrate the relation of this person existing, right? To celebrate the relation between you and me, and that it's my birthday, right? It's my ontological arrival, and um, you know, the gift is there to celebrate that idea. It's not to prove that you love me more or less. It's to mainly celebrate the relation itself. So this idea of gift is to maintain the relation and celebrate the relation, right? And so we can shift the logic of exchange, because exchange is inevitable, from commodity to gift, right? That when I do things for the other, I do things in a form of a gift, like when I'm doing the dishes or all these sacrifices that you're making. It's not that you're getting duped. It's simply to maintain the relation that exists. It's a celebration of the relation. That's how I would say that the logic of exchange is a gift, should be functioning as a gift, as a giving of a gift, um, merely to celebrate to celebrate and commit to the relation that already subsists, that exists, right? It's to support the relation. That's the whole point of subsistence. It's the minimal amount required to maintain the relation. And this is why I say exchanges are inevitable. You have to divide labor. Somebody has to do the dishes. Somebody has to do laundry, so on and so on. But the whole point is not valuing one task over the other and saying that the other has been gypped. Only when you do that do you fall into this idea of commodity relations where the other is only valuable insofar as they treat you as a valuable commodity, and so on. So, what this does, in my opinion, this emphasis of subsistence and gift, is it emphasizes the relation and de-emphasizes the the value of exchange. Because I think, in my opinion, exchange was merely. Uh, I think we've gotten confused because exchange is merely to be a byproduct of maintaining the relation, right? We somehow reduced all relations to exchange when in actuality relations can only be reducible to its subsistence, to its the fact that the relation must exist, right? That we're trying to maintain this relation and support this relation. And so in this case, even extreme cases of like abuse and so on, what ends up happening, you can say, and the argument can still remain valid, is that in cases of abuse, um, you are not the other is not occupied with maintaining the relation, actually, right? The abuser only maintains the relation insofar as it serves them, right? So automatically you can see how commodity relations kind of lead to the excessive climatic points where it's abuse, physical abuse, psychological abuse, because these are all, in my opinion, commodity based relations where the relation is only good so long as it serves some kind of purpose for you and you don't get duped and you don't get gypped, right? Whereas this idea of subsistence is not concerned with you or the other per se, or it's not concerned with what you're doing or what the other is doing, but it's concerned with the idea of maintaining the very relation that allows you to subsist as a couple, as a family, as a nation, as a state, however you want to frame it. Um, this is to me the important maneuver that we can make, where everything we do should be interpreted as a gift to the other, in order to celebrate and remind ourselves of the commitment to subsist in this relation as two, or as a whole, or as a group, however we want to look at it. Of course, this gets way more complex with uh, mass scale. You know, can there be subsistence in mass scale? And this is kind of my response to Daniel Garner. I mean, I think you can. I think you can, but it involves a kind of different reorientation of government and its people. Meaning, like, for example, the idea that the government exists, right, is predicated on its subsistence, right? Like the people created the government. And so the government depends on its people, and the people depend on its government. So the government has to do what it says. It has to try to do what the people want, because if they look at it rather as a way to subsist the relation between government and its people, then it needs to celebrate this relation, and it needs to do what they're saying needs to be done. Um, and so you can, you know, I think there is room for it to remain the same, but it would just be rather than the focus of exchange for government as such. It's this idea, because, in my opinion, again, exchange is inevitable. You have to exchange. You have to offer. Uh, so yes, I think it's possible in some ways that you can reframe mass scale as this idea of subsistence, that in order for the government and its people to coexist, subsistence must be met. Like a minimum of support must be met for its subsistence. Um, and so we can look at it that way, as the gift is the subsistence is the gift, so on and so on. But yeah, that's all I really had to say and touch up on this topic of the logic of exchange, the logic of subsistence, and how we can kind of reframe the inevitable idea of exchange without reducing it to exchange, but emphasizing subsistence, emphasizing the relations that exist between us as a gift, as a way of maintaining the relations necessary to exist together, in difference, and so on. So, I mean, there's definitely a lot there to still continue and explore and debate, and so on. But I do think this is an honest step in that direction. I do think this idea is an honest step in a better way of reorienting our relations towards subsistence rather than exchange. And all right, that's it. I kept it. I try to keep it like 25 or less. So, anyways, I hope you guys, kind of enjoyed those thoughts and provocations or whatever. And yeah, all right. See you guys later. Take care. Bye.